Hey guys, Zach Ditmars here for Fish Talk Magazine. Thanks for tuning in for the November edition of Live with Lenny. We got a lot to talk about tonight. First off, what happened to Rocktober? I don't know. That's what we're wondering here. Let's ask the angler-in-chief what he has to say.
Oh, man, I wish I knew. And, you know, the truth of the matter is, way up north and way down south, folks have been catching some rockfish. Of course, the anglers in waters from the state line down in Virginia have been catching specks and reds. But in the Middle Bay, the rockfish have been MIA. It has been tough to get bites recently. Now the good news. Wait, I got some good news, and we're going to get in this more in a minute. But this week, I have been getting more and more reports of a better and better bite in the Middle Bay, as well as down south, as well as up north. So I think we might be getting into Rockvember here.
I got a nice 26 the other day, so, you know, I'm optimistic.
Oh, I'm still upset about that fish.
Yeah. But you know, it was lucky.
Sunset,
sunset bite, close to home, and lucked out. But we got a big show tonight. We've got lots to talk about it before we get into the nitty-gritty. We're going to talk about some invasives. We're going to talk about forecast for 2025. We got a special guest coming up in a few minutes, so stick around for that. Remember, be sure to answer – post your questions, and we'll be sure to answer them in a timely manner. Try to make them relevant to the current conversation. Live with Lenny is made possible by Yamaha Outboards, and we'd like to thank our sponsor for that. If you're looking for a new motor, if you're looking for service, repower, check out fishtalkmag.com/Yamaha for a selection of local dealers up and around the Chesapeake Bay, Maryland, Virginia.
Forward slash, not a backslash?
Forward slash, yeah.
Is it? Okay. I can't tell the difference.
So each month for Live with Lenny, we like to announce the winners of the Great Chesapeake Invasive Count. And
we got some winners.
We do have some winners. Before we get started, we have a telecommunications satellite Starlink from Executive Director David Sikorsky. Dave, are you there? Dave?
Hey, Zach. Hey, Lenny. Hope you guys are doing well tonight. I have a surprise, a new prize we're going to give out to Invasives Count members for the month of November. Anybody that signs up for the Invasives Count and renews their membership or joins as a member during the month of November will be drawn on December's Live with Lenny to win this 22-inch electric tabletop grill. So this is a great portable product, or it can be a staple at home. Great for grilling up any of those fish you bring home, or deer, or anything else you might want to cook up this fall season. So again, just sign up as a member, register for the Invasives Count, which is free, and your name will go into a drawing on Live with Lenny in December. And stand by for some more prizes we have coming up. It is giving season. We're happy that you share your data with us and support the education around all these different fish out there in the Chesapeake through the Great Chesapeake Invasives Count. And so we're ready to give back some prizes to you. So sign up, join up, and stay involved.
Wow, man. I don't know where Dave was, but it looked like some kind of warehouse. Like I saw pizza oven and griddle in the background.
I think that was the CCA Maryland World Headquarters. So anyway, let's dive into this October's winners for the Great Chesapeake Invasive Count. Again, if you're new to this, this is a year-long event. If you're catching northern snakehead, blue catfish, or flathead in any Chesapeake Bay tributaries, you can register for free and enter them for a chance to win some great prizes like...
Ooh, Richard, you are one lucky winner, man. That is sweet. The Engel Cooler Live Well. And Drew got a pair of the Marucci's. And Drew, you get the gift card. So if the style on screen is not to your liking, you get to choose.
And this guy won last month. He gets 2 pairs.
Oh, no way. Yeah. Another one for John Britt. Congrats, John.
All right, next up.
Josh, you win the tool set. Man, I want one of these. I gotta get out and catch more invasives so I can win one of these.
And last but not least,
Aaron gets another tool set with the fish grips. Gotta love it, especially if you're a snakehead guy, because those things are not easy to control until you get those grips on them. And make sure you put your hand through that little lanyard so it's secure, because they will get out of your hand and take the fish grips with them.
I've seen it. So if any of you guys are watching any winners that were announced, this is the website you need to go to, and it'll give you the option to have your item mailed to you or pick it up at All Tackle Annapolis. So be sure to check it out. All right. One last thing before we get into tonight's discussion. Lenny, thank you so much for all your effort. Fish for a Cure. We did it again. We raised over $11,000. We have a few more days to go for Team Fish Talk Prop Talk, and we're really proud that we can do that year after year.
It's freaking awesome. And dude, don't thank me. We got to thank our contributors and all the people who participated in our online auction. Thank you, folks. I can tell you, I have met with the beneficiaries of this program. I've talked to the doctors and the nurses at AAMC, and there is just no better cause. There is not. So, folks, the Fish for a Cure tournament is coming up on Saturday. We'll be fishing in it, right, Zach? And it's going to blow Saturday, but we're still going to be going. And, we're down to the wire here this year, but I'll tell you what, people, if you haven't gotten involved with this tournament in the past, you really should put it on your calendar for next year and sign up a team, do some fundraising. The money benefits cancer patients. It's people who really are in the fight of their lives. And like I say, there's no better cause. It's a great organization to be involved with. And, I hope next year there are even more boats and even more money raised. And we're going to try. I think we should raise our goal next year. I think we got to raise it even higher. What do you think?
Let's do it.
All right.
All right, I'm going to step behind the curtain here, and if you have any
comments
or questions, I'll put them up, and Lenny and our special guest, stay tuned for him.
Yeah, man. So we wanted to talk about this Rocktober, Rockvember thing because, past years, last year was kind of like this, but, prior to 2-3 years ago, October was like, man, it was a month we all look forward to. It was the hottest month of the year, often. And in recent years, it's just been kind of lackluster in certain portions of the bay and sometimes all across the bay. So go ahead and bring up that first slide, if you would, Zach. Generally speaking, your Rocktober fish, they're your slot fish. They're in that slot size range. You might get them up to 30 inches. They're a lot of fun, and you can catch a ton of them. And go ahead and flip us right to the next slide. This one's going to depress you, people. Here's our problem, or certainly a big part of our problem, is that we have not had a good spawn. This is the 6th year running. And you can look at this chart and you can say, well, it was better than last year, but I'll tell you what, you can't put a happy face on these numbers. We have not had a really good spawn in a long, long time. And I get, people ask all the time, why? I'm not the right guy to answer that. I'm not a scientist, but I do talk to them, and I can tell you that there are so many factors involved that it's really difficult for anyone to say. But bottom line, a lot of it just comes down to the weather. And the same warm weather that we're seeing right now that has perhaps not caused the fish to kick it into high gear, we see that warmth in the spring. We've had low rainfall when we need lots of rainfall. It just hasn't been going really, really well for the spawn. Go ahead and take us to the next slide, if you would, please, Zach. So this is what we're all looking for, right? The bird show. I have not seen this one single time yet this year. Now, I know some guys have. There have been some bird shows. Everybody is kind of in agreement, though. They're brief in duration, and they're limited in where they're occurring. Now, hopefully, as the weather cools off, this will pick up. I certainly have my fingers crossed. But we're just, we're certainly not there yet. And when it's been happening in recent years, it hasn't been like past years. It hasn't been massive schools of fish churning the water for, an hour at a time. It's more like a little school pops up here and then they disappear and then a little one pops up there. So they're much tougher to fish. You got to get there faster. Generally speaking, you got to find the fish on your meter. Just the birds aren't enough because you could just be casting at a bunch of bunker. You really got to search around when you get to the school. You got to find the fish on the meter, then start casting. Generally speaking, the usual stuff works. 5-inch paddle tail on a 1-ounce head is great. Jigging spoons work great. the normal stuff does get him biting. Now, Matthew's saying he's fishing up north this weekend for rockfish and will be jigging, and these special spots are lures. Last weekend, there were a few fish, but they were scattered. Up north, there has been a bit of a bite. It hasn't been fantastic by any stretch. As far as spots go, the Patapsco, for some reason, we're going on 5 or 6 years now. The Patapsco has been like one of the zones. It really has. Up until recently, we were getting some good reports from Love Point, from Rock Hall. They've kind of petered out in recent weeks. John saying he had a bird show last weekend that reminded him of the old days. That's great to hear. But otherwise, there's a lack of breakers above the Bay Bridge. Yeah, that's kind of what it's been like. Pools Island should be going off right now. It should. Eelers should be catching like nuts. Kevin's saying he's catching rockfish in the creek, still fishing for pickerel. Kevin, please let us know what tributary you're on. We don't need to know the creek, but I'd like to know just the tributary so we get an idea of the general zone. Because I can tell you the south has been really tough. Guys, I know
Patapsco.
Patapsco?
Yep.
Okay. Well, that's, good to hear. That has been a zone. But again, I'm going to go back to, thanks, Kevin. There he is. The Pools Island bite should be a big deal right now. That should be one of the best bites in the bay. Historically speaking, you get to this time of year, you go up to pool, you drop some eels, or maybe jig them. That should be a fabulous thing. And I haven't been hearing about that yet. Now, I haven't been up there myself, so I can't say, I can't tell you it's not happening, but I haven't been hearing about it. So that tells me that lots of people are not getting up there and catching bunches of fish. The Chester, the mouth of the Chester, and that really should be red hot right now. Of course, so should Eastern Bay. So should the mouth of the South. A lot of these areas it's not like it should be. And part of the lack of fish is certainly going back. You go back 6 years now, that should be slot fish that we're catching. Those fish were never born. So we're not going to get them. Right? You can't make the fish be born. Matthew was at Pools. Thank you for chiming in on that, Matthew. That should be a really good bite right now. Like, I don't know how many years it's been. I cut my teeth fishing out of Bodkin Creek. And for many, many, many years after the moratorium was lifted, man, you pointed the bow at Pools. That was where you went. And there were pretty much always fish around there. Let's go ahead to the next slide, Zach, because let's talk about what might happen. Zach, I'm pretty sure you remember that particular fish.
Unforgettable. Thank you so much for that Christmas gift.
That's one beautiful rockfish right there. One of the nicest we saw last year. And we did get this tremendous late season run, December, just into January. It petered out, picked back a little bit in I guess it was March, but not like, it had been. But, I've got my fingers crossed that happens again this year. It may happen again this year. We do seem to be setting up for it. We're seeing a very similar pattern right now up the coast as what we saw last year before all these fish pushed into the bay. Lars is saying it's a late warm year. Yeah, it sure is. Mid-Jersey, buddies are catching seaside hikes. Okay, Lars, you're stealing my thunder, man. I was about to say, we're seeing exactly the same thing we did last year with the fish hitting Jersey, coming in close to the shore, mixed in with bluefin. And that's how it started last year. Those fish tracked down the coast. The bluefin, of course, don't come up the bay, but they were parked from Ocean City to Virginia, into Virginia, to Virginia Beach maybe. And when that happened, the rockfish, they kept going. They hung a right-hand turn at the mouth of the bay, and they came up the bay. Little bit of action for the Virginia guys, but the bulk of those fish just kind of cruised right up into the middle bay and started chewing on bait. Will it happen this year? I don't know. I sure hope so. But the bottom line is we're seeing a similar pattern set up. So there's a decent possibility. Now, I want to remind everybody, because a lot of folks last year, they were like, oh, my God, everybody talks about their new rockfish and look at this awesome bite. Well, the fact of the matter is the fish are concentrated. And this is really one body of fish. It makes it seem like there are tons to us when they're here. But we got to remember that as this run has progressed, both last year and this year, where guys are catching these rockfish, there are tons of them. 20 miles up the coast, 20 miles down the coast, there are none. And, years ago, there'd be guys catching fish at Long Island, off Jersey, off Delaware at the same time. The masses of fish were so large that they stretched that far. It's obviously it's not one mass, but the main body of fish would stretch that far. In recent years, they've been hyper concentrated. And when I say hyper concentrated, I mean hyper concentrated. When these fish that made, they made news off Jersey, they made news coming up the bay, but you know what? They were being caught from basically, there are exceptions, but basically Bloody Point to Salmons. That was the zone. Now, if you're running out on the bay and you're going fishing one day, that's a pretty big stretch, right? But in terms of a biomass of fish, that's teeny tiny. That's a teeny tiny little stretch. There should be some fish through there. There should be some fish off the mouth of the Rap. There should be some fish off the mouth of the James. There should be some fish at the CBBT. There should be some fish on the coast. So it really is, it can be deceiving, and we need to remind ourselves of that. And I've been banged on by some folks who go, oh, yeah, you're just saying don't believe your eyes. I'm not saying that at all. What I'm saying is consider it the big picture. And the outlook that we have for that bite this year is looking pretty good right now. But it doesn't change the fact that overall, in the big picture, the numbers of the stock are way, way down. And if you don't believe it, I go right back to saying, where are all the 14, 16, 18, 20, 22-inch fish? Why aren't we catching tons of them all the time? Because they weren't born. It's as simple as that. And we may gain some extra insight into this whole thing in a moment. I'm really curious to hear what our guest has to say about this, because something that I've noticed in tandem with the rockfish as the spawn has been really bad. And Dave's saying he's seen it much slower than in past years. Yeah, man. 5 years running, I've been saying it's the worst year I can remember. The worst falls in particular. This is the 5th year, worse than last year. Our guest coming up works for the USGS, and he may have some additional insight, because as I've seen these numbers on the rockfish chart just sit super low, the white perch numbers are doing the same thing. It's gotten around here, it's gotten harder and harder to catch white perch. I know there's been some decent perch fishing in the Magathy, in the Severn, but if you talk to guys who've been around forever, they say it's not the same. And on the whole, I'm afraid we're seeing the same thing with white perch. And I gotta wonder, is it related to this next slide? Zach, go ahead and pop it up. And here we're going to see this. This was the cover contest winner this month for Fish Talk, a big giant blue cat. And the last couple of years, when I've gone white perch fishing, February, March, I'm going, or perch fishing, I'm sorry, February, March, going for the perch run, I'm catching these blue cats, and I'm having a really hard time catching cats. And let's bring on our guest. We have Clay from the USGS. Hey, Clay, how you doing?
Hey, great. Thanks for having me.
So, man, my first question to you, is there a relationship here? What do we know?
I think you're probably onto something. You kind of hit on a little bit of a key word there when you said biomass. We've known a lot about the bay changing over time as far as becoming more nutrient rich and things like that. But at a certain point, systems can kind of reach a carrying capacity. And if you're filling up with biomass of one thing, you typically have to chip away at the edges of others to support that. So you're probably pretty well onto that. And a lot of our data we've been collecting kind of tends to support that theory as well.
Now, you say data you're collecting. I want to know, what is the USGS doing to look at these invasives? I mean, it's not just blue cats. We got the flatheads, we got the snakeheads, but the blue cats seem to be kind of the 100-pound gorilla, right? Or is it a 1,000-pound gorilla? I think it's a 1,000-pound gorilla. Whatever. What are you guys doing?
Sure. Well, we're starting to kind of shape our strategy. We're really working backwards from the model that was used in the Asian carp problem, kind of working in the Mississippi River. So a lot of those same teams are kind of informing policy, but we're you name it, we're doing it. We're doing biosurveillance with environmental DNA. We're doing diet studies. We've got some of the best modelers in the business, kind of trying to capture these changes in populations in real time. So there are folks out there modeling the menhaden, the striped bass, the blue catfish populations, and seeing these thumbs up, thumbs down trends kind of in real time and projecting into the future. And then, the work that I'm doing kind of touches on all of those, and also some disease work, because typically when things come places that they haven't been before, they bring diseases with them. And then that introduces a whole other suite of factors into the whole decision process.
Now, I got another question for you. I'm going to ask you in a sec, but before I do, I just want to remind everybody, if you got any questions for Clay, you pop them right there into the comments and we'll get them answered. This is a pretty unique opportunity to have him here, so feel free to do that. But I want to ask, biomass has come up already. Help us wrap our heads. What kind of biomass are we talking about when it comes to blue cats?
I'm not actually going to speculate on numbers just because they're outrageous. But a few weeks ago, I was fortunate enough to be on a boat that did some shocking with Virginia, and we were right on the Bay Bridge. And I've spent a lot of time on shocking boats over my career, and I've never seen anything like what happened. You could pretty much have walked from piling to piling without getting your feet wet. It was truly staggering. I was kind of unimpressed until they got close to the structure, and then the water just kind of boiled and became a solid sheet. So it was insane.
At the Bay Bridge?
Correct. Yeah. Well, this was now you're testing my geography. We came out of the DC harbor and went south for 30 minutes on a slow boat.
Okay, so you were on the Potomac.
We were on the lower Potomac, yes, sir. Yeah.
Okay. So
not the Bay proper.
Right, you were scaring me for a second there. I was
well,
like, oh my God, the salinity should be up there. So you're talking, that's like the 301 bridge, I think, right?
I don't want to lie and tell you that it is and be wrong, but
I think that would be right. Someone can chime in and let us know for sure.
Woodrow Wilson's correct.
Woodrow Wilson Bridge?
Yep, Dave was right. Yep, and Dave was also there, so he can back up what I was saying. Yep.
495. Okay, Woodrow Wilson Bridge. Okay. Yeah. Thank you, David. So that is known as an area that the Potomac. I mean, like you said, there's some astronomical numbers that have been thrown around about the biomass in the Potomac. I mean, we've been seeing that for a while now.
Yeah, no, it was truly depressing. Someone who grew up fishing the Potomac and spent a lot of time working on the South Branch of the Potomac. It was very sad to see something that basically just been converted to a monolith.
Did you see many rock come up?
Didn't own that boat, but this was water was a lot warmer then, and I guess this was probably closer to August at this point. But all I saw were blue cats and some flatheads on that particular journey. Wow, nothing else? That was mostly what we were targeting, so it was kind of keying in to make a point. But it was certainly the least diverse group I've seen in a while. That's not awesome to hear. So tell us, what have you guys learned thus far about what these invasives are doing? Sure. And I want to ask you, I'm going to add to that. I'm curious about diet. Yeah. So fortunately, diet is what I've spent a lot of time doing. I've picked through a lot of blue catfish guts and seen a lot of what they've eaten. And been fortunate to work with a lot of great folks that have done similar studies kind of in different tribs all around the Bay. And unfortunately, story's kind of been the same. So story is that blue cats are voracious predators and they eat pretty much whatever they come into contact with is the theory. And then pretty much back that up with reality. So when you start getting up into these backwater areas, they're sometimes, chock full of snakehead. And then, if you're in an area that's pretty crab dense, they sure put a hurting on blue crab. Menhaden seems to be a favorite, and the river herrings in general just seem to be slurped down. And it's kind of real indication of if you're targeting them, probably match the hatch, because whatever's in the area is what they're going to be keyed in on. And that was a recurring trend that we saw.
Now, Rich is asking about the osprey, the relationship to the menhaden population. I know or I think menhaden isn't exactly what you're studying, but you have any input on that?
Sure. Yeah. So we know menhaden are on the decline in general. There's a lot of reasons for that. And I know that it's a hot button issue as far as like the politics of the situation. And, I'm fortunate enough to work for an agency that doesn't make management decisions. And so we just do good science and put it out there for the decision makers to have the best information. I worked on a project this year that we had a novel bacterial pathogen that killed a bunch of menhaden that wasn't documented in the area. That was off the coast of New Jersey. And we, had evidence that was from a different part of the Atlantic, more associated with North Carolina. So fish were where they weren't supposed to be at a time they shouldn't have been, when bacteria was present, and it was bad news for everyone. But I wear a lot of hats, as I kind of mentioned, and I'm working on an osprey project on the bay. And we have cameras on nests, and we've documented a bunch of nesting pairs to monitor egg success, and then take pictures of what diet has been there. And I haven't had a chance to go through those fish data yet to identify the individual fish coming back, but my gut feeling is there are going to be fewer menhaden and a lot of blue cat, which, at that size range are not that nutritious for a lot of things.
I can tell you on the Patuxent, I know those osprey are eating a ton of catfish. And I say that because I used to have a duck blind lease. And one year, an osprey built a nest on top of the duck blind. Then, of course, it left in the fall. And we went to brush the blind, and there were just massive piles of catfish skeletons everywhere.
Yep. And I totally believe it. There are individual models out there that basically folks smarter than I have gone through and essentially converted fish to kilocalories. And so you can plug in the size of an individual fish and ultimately translate that to calories. And I'm sure there's a break-even point there where, nesting success probably is influenced by the number of calories consumed by those individual birds. And I bet that there's a reason that we don't make fish oil out of catfish. So
that seems reasonable.
Yeah. So there's there's a lot of common sense to a lot of the work, but you can't inform policy without the data to back it up.
I gotta ask you, what's that?
I have a direct via satellite link from CCA Executive Director David Sikorsky. Let's take a look at that electrofishing day. We have that.
Oh my goodness, we have footage.
We have footage here.
Wow, man, you're getting all kinds of techie cool.
Crazy, right? Well, never mind. Hold tight. I'll hear that in a moment.
All right, well, you work on that. I got a question I'm dying to ask. What's the craziest thing you've ever found in the belly of a blue cat?
I think it was probably a wood duck.
Wood duck.
Yeah. So one of the groups we worked with was Salisbury University, and we pulled a wood duck out of one of those stomachs. Yeah. So didn't have to do DNA testing. So that's one of the fun parts is blue catfish, their stomachs are really strong. The water's warm a lot of times when they're eating, so they digest really quickly. And you can't always identify what they're eating just by visual. So sometimes the partially digested goo you have to do genetic testing on. And that's what we did at my lab, was the genetics part. And didn't have to do any genetic testing on the wood duck. That one was pretty much dead ringer.
I guess when you got a crab or clams, that's probably pretty clear.
Right. Yeah. If you have hard parts, you can usually identify it. But, individual fish skeletons are frequently really hard. And, half digested fish are exceptionally hard.
Yeah. Lovely. Zach, if you're not technically occupied, it would probably be a good time to bring up the next slide, because this one shocked me. We did our cover contests, and we invited people to send in pictures with blue cats flathead, or it was just blue cats. I'm sorry. We invited people to send in pictures of blue cats. I'm pretty sure, and Zach, you correct me if I'm wrong, I think we had more entries than any cover contest ever.
Quite a few, yes.
Yes, the dozens and dozens. And at first I was a little worried about this. Before the entries came in, we decided to do this blue catfish cover contest. I was like, man, I don't know. Are we going to get enough people to send in photos of blue cats? Are that many people really catching them? And they just came in like a rainstorm. All these different pictures of people holding blue cats. And they weren't, several were from the Potomac, but lots of them from the Susquehanna, lots of them from the Upper Bay, Sandy Point, the Eastern Shore. I mean, you name it, they were coming from everywhere.
Now, Clay, did you work with Dr. Noah Bressman?
I did, yes.
So I was at the this year's Nanticoke Invasive Derby. We caught about 15 on our boat. There was like 60 anglers total. And in a matter of about 6 hours, I think we brought in 400 blue cats off the Nanticoke. It was just unreal.
Yep. That doesn't at all surprise me. That was one of our
shocking is some of them were this big.
Yeah.
Just the ones you caught.
Every little bit matters, buddy. Every little bit matters, I got to do the hard work. All right, who wants to see the electrofishing footage? All right.
Oh, you got it? You got it?
There we go.
Flathead. Flathead.
Wow. What'd you guys do with all those things?
A lot of that was show and tell, but a bunch of them got caught and brought on. And yeah, I think seemed like in general, people were kind of tired of dealing with them. But there's, the commercial processors are making a lot of hay and providing really good products. I think we're kind of fortunate that blue catfish and snakeheads are kind of more tasty than a lot of invaders that we usually get to deal with. So at least there's kind of an avenue that makes things good.
So what about Wayne's question here? Hey, Wayne, what about electroshocking and removal? Is that an option?
Yeah, I think it probably is. I know that there are folks that actually have specific permits, and it totally depends on jurisdiction and legality in the individual state jurisdictions and everything. But yeah, there are individual business owners that have shock boats that use that as their harvest collection method, and I'm certain that they do well because the biomass is obviously there.
Yeah, I know they're doing it in the state of Virginia. I believe they are not yet doing it in the state of Maryland, at least. And I understand there were some concerns about, if somebody starts shocking the water and maybe someone's swimming nearby or something like that. And that's kind of a potential impediment there. And then we have the whole processing issue with a whole separate issue, which, we don't even need to get into right now. There's a lot of politics involved with that. Thank you, Mississippi. Or is it Louisiana? I forget. But they've made processing catfish more difficult for us. So hopefully we'll get past that hurdle. All of that said, the bottom line is I'm not a real big catfish guy. I've never loved eating channel cats. I've just never been huge on it. Blue cats are quite tasty. Now, Walt's mentioning that over 30 inches, you've got potential toxin buildup. And I believe the specific size you want to consider eating depends somewhat on the waterway they're found in, correct?
For sure. Yeah, that's going to be situation dependent. And I mentioned everything under the sun's on the table. Contaminant testing is another thing that we're doing. The big assumption was that things like PCBs were going to be bioaccumulated in these larger individuals. And, we're working through dealing with that is, what the reality of that situation is. But like you said, it's going to be situationally dependent.
And Walt's bringing out a great question here. What do you do with the ones that are too big to eat? And I've actually got a great answer for you. You ready for this? I got a great answer. Because I researched this. If you go to fishtalkmag.com, you'll find the article on this. You can turn the catfish into amazing garden fertilizer. And it's not a horrific process. Basically, you chop the fish up, you put it in an airtight container with a certain amount of water, and I think it's some molasses, and you let it sit for like a month and make darn sure it's airtight, or your spouse will be very upset with you, as will your neighbors. But in about a month, you take it out of there and then you mix it with some more water, and you've got basically a spray-on fertilizer for your garden that literally can't be beat. Like, you go buy the stuff, it's not going to be as good. So, Walt, check it out. Zach, do you remember the name of that article? It was one of the Blue Cat articles for sure, because it was specifically to address this issue of what do you do when you get one too big to eat. I don't remember the specific title, but you can actually go to fishtalkmag.com and type fertilizer into the search box. I'm pretty sure it's the only article we ever did on turning fish into fertilizer. But I did it. I did it experimentally in my own yard, and it worked. It worked. The container was airtight. I did not get into trouble. Minor miracle. Now, Clay, there's one other thing I want to ask you about.
Sure.
And I understand you've also done a lot of work into this splotchy bass thing. And
I have,
we've got, but like the Eastern Shore is like covered in these splotchy bass. There it is. Thank you, Zach. You can see right under its eye, it's got that big blob. And I know that we're going a little off topic, but when I heard that you were an expert on this, I wanted to know, like, what is exactly going on with these fish?
So, yeah, I've been really fortunate to get to work on a ton of different projects. I hope I've made that kind of clear that I'm a jack of all trades and master of exactly none. But yeah, so that was one of my favorite projects, and one that is continuing to grow and evolve in real time. But what we now know is that those kind of hallmark blotches are associated with a viral infection. We've identified viruses in both largemouth and smallmouth bass. We've got some papers coming out really soon that'll kind of document what that infection looks like and what it really means from the broader virus standpoint. And we actually know that dark pigmentation is migrating melanocytes moving to where the virus is. So, melanocytes associated with pigmentation, but they're also kind of a generic immune function. So they can kind of serve in that role too. So yeah, that's kind of a hallmark that fish has a virus and is working to clear it.
Yeah. Now, we catch these all the time, like in the Eastern Shore mill ponds. Should we be worried about that?
There isn't any evidence that they even transmit between species. So they're really host specific. So you definitely don't have to worry about catching a virus from a cold water animal typically. Cold blood to warm blood is not really a virus transmission risk for the most part.
I was asking on behalf of the fish. Like, should we
now, from the management perspective, it's a really interesting question, and one I'm not sure we have 100% know the answer to.
Interesting.
We know that it's an immune response. So, a lot of times people tell me, well, it's always these big healthy fish that get blotchy. And if it's an immune response and you're a more healthy individual, you're going to mount a more robust immune response. You're going to look blotchier. It's going to be more noticeable. And that doesn't take into account the ones that might be sick in the shadows and dying quietly as a result of this or something else. So I
got to say, there are tons of fish with this one. Like on the Eastern Shore, like more than half you catch have it. Now, would you like to address Dave's question about a slot rock with a red lesion? I think I know the answer, but I want to leave it to the science guy.
Sure. So probably not. This infection's, it's got pretty much a hallmark characteristic. We're looking for pretty black, pretty inky. I've seen a lot of stripers with mycobacteria infection that can turn into a bloody red lesion. But we have seen fish that they start blotchy. They're kind of get like pre-fragilized a little bit and they get a secondary bacterial infection and it turns bloody and nasty really quickly. So it, can't rule anything out. We're talking about viruses. These are things that are really quick to change and adapt. And you can't really rule anything out when it comes to the virus world, which is what makes it kind of fun.
I'd like to just chime in that I would want to ask Dave when that fish was caught, because in the summertime, you see a lot of that micro. You see a ton of fish with it when the water's warm, an unfortunate number. Used to be more, actually, I think, probably due to, you could tell me if I'm wrong, but when we had a much tighter population density, when there were many, many, many more rockfish, and they were kind of packed in fin to fin, man, you don't have to fish. But generally, by this time of year, most of it's gone. You don't see it very often. Caught in July, there you go. Yep, summertime fish. And often by at this time of year, you'll catch a fish where you can see where that is healed. It's not uncommon. Now, Eric, hey, Eric. Eric's asking how the virus is spread between fisheries.
That's a great question. Yeah, it's a great question. And yet again, this is why we're doing the work. It's kind of hard to know 100%, but kind of how invasives are spread, one bucket at a time. Nothing would surprise me. We're talking about an area where, it only takes one derelict with a 5-gallon bucket to take a fish from below a dam to above a dam, and all of a sudden you have a naive population that has a new thing they haven't seen before. So that's probably the route we're going.
And you mentioned it is in smallmouth as well?
Correct. Yeah. So you mentioned the Susquehanna earlier. Susquehanna was actually one of the hallmark locations that we first identified the blotchy bass syndrome, which is what we started calling it. And it was first documented in smallmouth. We beat our heads against the wall trying to figure out why we couldn't find the same genetic markers in largemouth bass that looked identical, and turns out totally different, related, but different virus.
Oh, really?
Yep. So closely related, same condition, but different critters.
That's pretty wacky. Now, I gotta say, I've never seen it in a smallmouth personally, but I do end up catching a lot more largemouth than smallmouth. So that's probably why, simply because of where I live and what's close by. I don't get to the smallmouth very often.
Yeah, and it's more prevalent within smallmouth, within like kind of pre-spawn fish. So, the people that really catch those cold water fish that are stacked up, they seem to catch, 20, 30% blotchy fish. And then all of a sudden by summertime, it, quote unquote, goes away. And there's a lot of, you mentioned a lot of complicating factors. There's a lot of complicating factors that probably explain that change in appearance.
Interesting. Very cool. All right. Well, we got a couple more slides we want to go through on the current bite and what's coming up. So, Clay, I'm going to ask you to stick around. Can you stick around for a little while?
Sure, absolutely.
And people, put up your questions. If you got any questions for Clay.
Hey, we have quite a few questions. You want to do a little lightning round for the?
Absolutely.
Okay, I'm gonna pop them up, and they're kind of all over the place, so they didn't really fit into our conversation. But I'm gonna rewind real quick for one from the previous conversation about the fertilizer, and that was, can toxins in the fertilizer fish contaminate garden soil?
So I think this is a matter of scale. In general, when you're talking about anything toxic, it's the dose that makes the poison. So, your biggest risk from any bioaccumulated toxin is bioaccumulating it yourself. But if you're adding another buffer in there, like such as plant, soil, filtration, anything like that, you're having that risk, if not more. So I think that's kind of a self-solving problem based on the method. But a good question, though.
I sure am glad you answered it, because I was like,
no, it's amazing how many of these scientific questions are so interrelated, and you can't do a good job in one thing with knowing a heck of a lot about all the other stuff too. So, really fortunate. As far as tagging blotchy fish, not really. We've done some tank studies. I'm working with a group in Florida that's doing some tank studies to kind of track infection over time. I was also really fortunate to work with Bass Pro Shops and do a kind of a nationwide survey of all the live aquarium fish. And so we didn't have any tagged fish realistically, but we had, we had a bunch of named fish that everybody knew and recognized that we could kind of track based on social media pictures and everything else. And then we've also done some citizen science work. So not directly tagging, but have tracked a ton of fish, and all that stuff's coming out soon. And I'm happy to, I'm pretty Googleable. So find me, ask me questions. I'm happy to help. As far as effects on fish development, that's a hard question to answer. So I kind of mentioned that there's this pre-spawn association. That means that the fish have to make it to spawn to kind of have the hallmark response to the presence of the virus. So that doesn't discount the ones that were never born, and it doesn't discount the ones that never made it that far. It's kind of hard to know because it's kind of a situation that's ripe for survivor bias.
Survivor bias.
Yeah,
That's a very
so
fancy term.
Yeah, so it's a kind of a idea popularized by World War II airplanes, where they reinforced parts of the airplanes that came back with bullet holes, and that did make a bit of difference because those are the planes that came back. It was the areas that weren't reinforced that were making the difference, and the planes weren't coming home. So that might be a situation we're seeing, that these blotchy fish, they're the ones that made it home. So that's the theory behind making sure we do the work. And as far as reservoirs versus rivers, well, I think that's kind of pretty indicative of viral association. So you're kind of dealing with what's essentially a closed population versus a thematically open one. So if you don't have high levels of virus in a river, you may never see it in a pretty mobile population. You don't have the shooting fish in a barrel, but the viruses float on the water just as well. And if it's a closed population, you've got more fish coming in contact with more other fish or more virus, and better chance of getting blotchy enough to be reported.
That kind of makes sense with regards to the eastern shorefish too, because those are mostly small contained waterways, and those fish are packed in.
Right. Yeah. And it's, and we're talking about something that seems to have a pretty clear association with reproduction when fish are naturally packed in for a variety of reasons. So, there's always a lot of moving parts.
And I guess it immediately makes you wonder, and I'm going to just put this out there, you tell me if I'm wrong. Does the virus spread the same way as like a snakehead would, where it's getting from this pond to this pond, either because, somebody filled the bucket, or maybe an osprey picked up the fish and then flew for a while and then whoops, dropped it, and then it goes. It's that kind of spread that can.
That's exactly it. That's one of the biggest fears that in general we have when it comes to invasive species biology. And you kind of have to think of disease as an invasive species in a lot of ways. Typically, there are lots of scientific jargon to describe this. But,
you have an invasive species behind you.
That's one of those small gray catfish, I guess. But, yeah, she's neither pretty nor smart, but she is present.
That was great timing, kitty cat.
Yeah, hey, at least she's got the comedic element down. But yeah, no. So there's a likely part of that is we have to avoid these spillback and spillover events that come from invasive species. And yeah, it's just part of the gig.
All right, Zach, did we make it through our lightning round? Did we lose Zach? Come on, we didn't really lose Zach.
Oh, I'm here. My mic was off. I'm sorry. We have some questions pertaining to osprey, shrimp, spot and croakers. Want to kind of?
Sure. Yeah.
Bring them up.
Yeah, please. I don't know. That's outside of my purview. I'll turn that one over.
That is happening. I mean, I'm hearing this constantly. I have a friend who lives in Deal who can now walk out on the pier from like August on into the early fall and throw a cast net and catch shrimp cocktails. I mean, it's kind of crazy. I haven't heard about it in the Upper Bay. Doesn't mean it's not happening. I just haven't heard about it. But as for changing the rockfish feeding, I don't think that's going to be much of an issue for two reasons. First off, there aren't all that many rockfish competing for the food that's out there, right? There's certainly less than there used to be. And B, well, smaller rockfish have always eaten grass shrimp. In fact, surprisingly big rockfish like grass shrimp. There was a time, this is going way back, man. I was a youngin'. Going back pre-moratorium, I can remember my dad taking us fishing, and believe it or not, we chummed for rockfish with grass shrimp. He'd push a roller net through the sea grasses, which existed back then, and then dump them in a 5-gallon bucket, and you would take them out and squish a handful and throw them in the water, and then take them out and put like 3 or 4 on a hook and throw it in the water. And rockfish, 20 to 26 inch rockfish would be swimming up and eating all these grass shrimp. So it's certainly the kind of thing that they're used to feeding on. I guess now, if you're talking like, Bay Bridge South, they might just have some bigger fish to feed on. I like feeding on shrimp. I'm kind of psyched to go out there with a cast net and get some myself. I haven't taken the time yet. Spot and croakers in the upper bay with numbers. And notice in the last 2 years, no cow-no rays coming up in the bay, and they eat lots besides blue cats and snakeheads. So, Mark, I don't know exactly where you're located, but I've seen plenty of cow-nose rays coming up as far as the bridge. I assume they're going farther north. They're not going to stop there. You got anything on this one, Clay?
Yeah, I'm not positive I'm nailing down the question. If it's specific to blue catfish impact on spot and croaker, we know that that's a thing. If there are in areas where we kind of had reports of pretty high spot and croaker numbers, those bellies were pretty much packed with those fish too. And kind of going back to the biomass question, if it's related to blue catfish and they're knocking down primary forage that cow-nose rays would be making the trip for, probably doesn't make the trip worth as much.
Oh, I see what you're saying. So if you got a high concentration of blue cats, that could actually discourage the cow-nose because they're eating all the food.
Yep. No, it's kind of a thing. I mean, I'm curious to see if this translates to, what we see in the striper population movement and everything else. Obviously, the water temperature is a huge deal too, but primary forage is a big driver too of kind of when those timing events happen. You don't make it very far going hungry.
Interesting. Now, Dave, I'm so glad Dave asked about top tips for catching these nuisance fish, because I sent you an email the other day, remember? And I said, how can we bring this back to actionable for the anglers? I meant to ask Dave, but this conversation has been so engrossing, I didn't get to it. So please, answer Dave's questions. What have you learned that we can turn into fishing tips?
So it's funny how amazingly we can throw all of this information in the world at you and still come down to like 2 simple things. First, kind of mentioned it earlier, match the hatch. Just in general, a bottom rig or a double drop rig with whatever's in the area, chunked up menhaden, chunked up spot or croaker, whatever's around, you can pretty much nail blue cats. And then the dumbest thing, I was fishing in Corpus Christi, Texas. I was totally out of my element, fishing an inland channel, didn't know what I was doing. And they said, well, I bet it'll eat shrimp. The answer is, I bet it'll eat shrimp. A lot of times, shrimp's kind of becoming a sneaky good blue catfish bait. So, I mean, and that might correspond to kind of the shifting trophic ecology of the bay, and shrimp becoming more prevalent because of whatever reason. Got to take advantage of it.
I want to poke a little harder on this, because I have had a couple occasions where I have been in areas where I know there are a ton of blue cats, where we've caught them recently, when it's like almost impossible to get a bite. And when you do get a bite, it's like a little nip, 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 and then it's gone.
Yeah.
Help me
so
out.
In those situations, and that's the thing too, that you have to kind of get into the mind of the blue catfish. So they have 2 kind of active modes. So there's the ambush mode, and then there's like the active bottom feeding forage mode. If they're in, and I'm not going to get into the psychology of a fish or why they might be in one of those modes or the other, but the active foraging mode, they're going to run across bottom bait and it's game over. And that is what typically is a lot of the time. But blue catfish, they're shaped differently than a channel catfish. They're active open water predators. They even have kind of that counter shading like a shark has, where they're dark on top, light on the bottom, because they're mid-water column fish. So, at that time's, kind of getting away with something akin to like a pin rig with a live fish is a lot of ways. And, I've done a lot of trot lining, and you slandered Mississippi and Louisiana earlier. Done a lot of trot lining in both those states. And a lot of times, we'd hook a fish through the swim bladder on a trot line. And, that kind of helped you select for blue catfish versus other more demersal fish. So, yeah, so you kind of got to have both arrows in your quiver on that one.
Interesting. And you said through the swim bladder.
Yeah, so that's one trick that kind of made them sink a little bit more, particularly on a trot line if it wasn't a sunken trot line, just to kind of keep them kind of more middle of the water column.
Huh. Terrifically interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I'm used to doing it on sunfish, so kind of do your internal anatomy and identify where the swim bladder is, and make sure it's a place where it's legal to use live bait, obviously.
Which for blue cats, it certainly is. Although
Yeah.
we should point out, if you're using bait, live or dead, pretty much anywhere in the Chesapeake watershed where rockfish are present, you got to be using the circle hook. That is one thing. All right, Zach, did we make it through that time? We got any more questions popping up?
I think we're all caught up.
Okay. Well, let's see. We got a couple slides. I think we're burning through the time. Holy mackerel. We only got a couple minutes. All right. Hang tight, Clay.
Sure.
Let's see if we can lightning round the last few slides and then a lightning round any more questions that pop in. Sound like a plan?
Perfect.
All right. So go right ahead and bring the next one up, Zach. We're going to fly through these. All right. Little puppy drum here. Look at the angler. Look at how he's dressed. Here's another one of the things about our changing fisheries that's upcoming that I'm sure a lot of people are looking forward to. If I get a chance to jump in the car and drive south, I will be. The eastern shore of Virginia and the western shore too, but a lot on the eastern shore. This was a reader photo from last winter. Those puppy drum are not all leaving, people. There are some fish around. So even though we're into now a Rockvember, you still got a shot at the pups. I've heard some red drum being caught as far north as Sharps Island Light in recent weeks. We'll probably have some pop up at the power plant. I'd be shocked if we didn't through the winter months. But if you want to target drum, you can still do it. And it's, I can't swear it's going to happen all winter long, but there's a chance for it. And if it stays warm, you can kind of bet on it. All right, go ahead and bring me the next one here, Zach, if you would. More options. We're right back to the catfish here, but I want to look at this picture. You can see they are covered in ice. That's not from the cooler. That's from the cold. Okay, so one thing I wanted to mention about these catfish, these are winter feeders. And actually, some of the best catfishing I ever had on the Potomac was in mid-February. It's an awesome time to go for them. And at least in the upper and middle bay regions, if you can think of another 30, 40-pound fish that you can do battle with in the middle of February, please tell me. But they are around. All right. One more thing I wanted to get to tonight. Go ahead and bring up the next slide if you would, Zach. It's a lousy picture, people. I apologize for it. I couldn't find a better one for whatever reason. I wanted to bring up the jig with the skirt. And plus, also, this gives me a chance to make fun of David, also known as Fred, who is a awesome angler. I love him to death. He's come fishing with me several times. We have a great time. But you can see here, this was a late trip. We were using a skirted jig. And I just wanted to remind everybody, because I realized I was doing this the other day. I was throwing my jig. I haven't thrown a skirt in months. Haven't even thought about putting a skirt on. In the summertime, I don't like a skirt. We're now getting to the time of year where putting a skirt on that jig is absolutely, positively going to help. Okay. Now's the time, folks. As we get into this fall fishery, you want to boost the profile of the bait. It gives a really pretty wiggle as the jig goes up and down when you add that skirt. So I'm sure there's some other folks out there who've been fishing with a straight jig for the last couple months, haven't even thought about it yet. Hey, people, now's the time. Grab that skirt out, stick it on the jig head. It will boost your catch from here on out through the season. And I'll be throwing skirts from now on. Patrick's asking about my opinion of big flutter spoons during the fall. Patrick, they work. I can't tell you I use a ton of them personally because I usually go with the jig. It's just my thing. But I had some folks on the boat last year, multiple folks who were throwing the flutter spoon. They were getting slammed. It absolutely does work. The one thing I would say is if it's got that treble hook on the back, for gosh sakes, please get your split ring pliers, open up that split ring, take the treble hook off, throw it over your shoulder. Well, throw it somewhere safe and put on the single hook. As I have shifted through the years to fewer and fewer trebles and more singles, and now we have these inline singles available. Didn't used to have them. And when I started switching, we didn't have them. But now using the inline singles, I got to say, I am becoming more and more convinced all the time that it really doesn't make much of a difference. It really doesn't. Like you would think the treble with all those hooks has to help you hook more fish. I would ask you to think about this. How many times you've been using something with a treble hook and missed the fish or had the hook pull, right? It happens no matter what kind of hook you're using. And I really like all my topwater now. Either I've taken wire cutters and chopped the extra hook or I put singles on them. And I'm just not finding much of a difference. So I would challenge you, Patrick, if you're going to fish the flutter spoon, which I think is a good move, I would challenge you to put the single hook on it if it doesn't already have one there and kind of keep track and see if you can tell a difference. I'll bet you can't tell a difference in how many fish you hook up with, but it is a good move. They do the trick. The guys on the boat last year were catching. Oof. Zach, we got any more questions on there, either for me or for Clay or for both of us? Because I see we have surpassed the allotted time. And we can keep going, folks, if you got questions. I'm not running anywhere. Jonathan saying off Chesapeake Beach and hearing the bay has been dead this year. Last year was similar. What the heck's going on? Mackerel bite less, bluefish non-existent, spot and perch seem small and less. Rockfish slow as other areas. Maybe it's just me, but it's gotten worse. Thoughts, surprise. Jonathan, first off, total agree on the whole. Rockfish, like I said before, 5 years, worse and worse and worse and worse. Every year consecutively, I'm saying it's the worst I can remember. This year's the worst I can remember. Blues and Spanish. I don't have the answer for you. I don't know what it is, but I had the same observation. Really poor year. Once you got north of I want to say the Patuxent, but also it wasn't great there. I'm going to say north of the Potomac. It really was not a great year for him. But, and here's the big but, and I think this probably goes back to what Clay was saying earlier about biomass. While all of that is true, this past August, September was the best in the Middle Bay area that I ever remember in my lifetime for redfish. It was possible to go out and target reds and catch 6, 8, 10 redfish in an afternoon. I don't, I think prior, we've had runs of reds, never in those numbers. I think in prior years, I would say the best you would ever hope for was to catch 4 in an afternoon. So as there are fewer of those other fish around, a predator is going to move in because now there's more bait for him to eat. And I think we kind of got treated to that with the reds this year in the Middle Bay area. Of course, you got to kind of look at the Upper Bay, Middle Bay, Lower Bay. You got to look at them a little differently, right? Each is a little unique. But I would agree on the rockfish front, bomb, bluefish, Spanish Max, kind of a bomb. Now, Dave's saying he heard the blues were higher in abundance off North Carolina. That's interesting. And it looked like we might have a good year for blues early on. We saw early in the year, I guess it would have been May, we saw some bluefish showing up. And it was like, yeah, come on, here they come. But the numbers just never developed. I'm sure some of this has something to do with what came up earlier, the menhaden population. I don't know what the numbers are in the different zones of the bay right now, and I'm not sure that anybody really does, but I can tell you that all summer long, normally, when I walk down the pier, I see those little circular schools of the baby bunker swimming all over the place. I barely ever saw them this year. Now, that said, I'm seeing big schools of bait on my side scan in the creeks. have been for a good month. Still not seeing the bunker up top, but I'm seeing those schools. Are they bay anchovies? Are they bunker that are, for whatever reason, deciding not to come up to the surface? I can't tell you. I don't know. But, you know, all these little factors coming together. Matt's mentioning the big blues in the target ship. So is Rich. You guys, you're absolutely right. Like I said, Point Lookout north, right? They didn't come farther north. There were a lot of big blues, and they were big. They were big from the target ship down. Zach will remember, I'm sure, when we were down in the we fished Chesapeake to the CBBT. Zach, how thick were the bluefish down there this summer?
Pretty thick.
Pretty thick.
Almost the boat limit.
Like instantaneously. I mean, we did not spend a lot of time on them. And we were trying to catch redfish at some points, and you couldn't throw a plastic because the moment it hit the water, you'd feel a jerk and the tail would be gone. Like, there were a lot of blues. Now, those, interestingly, those blues were not as big as the Point Lookout target ship blues. Those fish were bigger. But down in that mouth of the bay area, there were a lot of bluefish. Now, immediately, you want to say salinity, right? Maybe it wasn't salty enough, but it was. We did not have a rainy summer. I've seen much lower salinity where we had swarms of bluefish at Love Point. For real. So my guess would be bait. I can't say for sure. Don't really know. But yeah, it's true. And the mackerel, too. The mackerel were really a disappointment. And we did not see the mackerel down south. I think we saw a couple jumping, but there was not much to it. Every year's different. Every year's different. Hopefully 2025 will be a good one. I hope those reds come back. I hope the big rockfish treat us in the wintertime. We're going to see what happens. I can tell you one thing, no matter what happens, you know what I'm going to do, Zach?
What's that?
Come on, one guess. What am I going to do next year?
Got me.
Go fishing as much as I possibly can.
Of course. Clay, so awesome having you on tonight.
Yeah, thank you guys.
That was a great discussion. Fascinating stuff. Really appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, no, thank you guys for having me. And like I said, I'm easily found and easily bothered. So if anybody has any questions or whatever, feel free to reach out and talk to your people. Make this an issue. The more public outcry we have, the more likely we are to be able to look into it and help come to solutions.
Awesome. Thank you, Clay. Thank you, Zach. Thank you, folks, for tuning in. We do appreciate it. We hope you all enjoyed the show.
See you next month.